There's a bear in a zoo that has been pacing the same 3-meter path for 11 years. Back and forth, every single day. The keepers feed it. The enclosure is clean. Nothing is physically wrong with it. But something is clearly not right. We watch it and we feel uncomfortable, but we don't always ask the obvious question. What is actually happening inside that animal's mind? And more importantly, is there a word for it? Because when humans repeat the same behavior compulsively, can't stop even when they want to, and seem trapped inside their own heads, we have a name for that. The question is whether that name applies to animals too. For most of human history, the answer was assumed to be no. Mental illness, the thinking went, required a certain kind of self-awareness. You had to be conscious enough to suffer, reflective enough to ruminate, complex enough to spiral. Animals were seen as creatures of pure instinct. They reacted, they didn't dwell. But that assumption has been quietly falling apart. Because the more carefully scientists study animal behavior, the harder it becomes to draw a clean line between a mind that can break and a mind that cannot. Let's start with something familiar. Dogs. Most people know that dogs can experience fear. But what happens when fear doesn't go away? Rescue dogs pulled from abusive situations often display symptoms that look remarkably similar to post-traumatic stress disorder in humans. They flinch at sounds that aren't threatening. They freeze in situations that should feel safe. Some refuse to eat, struggle to sleep, or become completely unable to interact normally with people or other animals. Veterinary behaviorists now recognize PTSD as a genuine diagnosis in dogs. The treatment looks similar too. Gradual exposure therapy, patience, sometimes medication. The same tools humans use. Because the problem, at its core, appears to be the same. But dogs are easy. Dogs are close to us. We project onto them constantly. So let's go further. Elephants. In areas where elephant populations were disrupted by culling operations, researchers observed something deeply unsettling in the surviving young. These elephants grew up displaying chronic aggression, erratic behavior, and a state of constant hypervigilance that never resolved. They weren't reacting to immediate danger. They were reacting to a threat that no longer existed, a past they couldn't leave behind. When older bull elephants were introduced to these groups, the behavior calmed. Structure and social connection reduced what looked, from every behavioral measure, like trauma. Elephants apparently need the same thing traumatized humans need. Safety, stability, and the presence of someone who has been through worse and survived. Then there are parrots. Parrots kept in isolation, or in environments without sufficient stimulation, frequently develop compulsive behaviors. They pluck out their own feathers. Sometimes obsessively. Sometimes until they've removed nearly all of them. The behavior serves no survival function. It causes harm. And it often continues even when the environment improves. Researchers describe it using the same framework used for obsessive-compulsive disorder in humans. A behavior that loops, that the animal seems unable to interrupt, that exists somewhere between habit and compulsion. The parrot isn't choosing this. In many cases, it cannot stop. Dolphins in captivity have shown patterns of repetitive, purposeless movement. Captive primates raised without adequate social bonds develop rocking, self-clasping, and withdrawal behaviors that mirror descriptions of severe early childhood neglect in humans. Even fish, animals we rarely associate with inner lives of any kind, show measurable anxiety responses when placed in unpredictable environments. Their behavior changes. Their biology changes. The stress is real even when we struggle to imagine it. Here's where it gets complicated though. Mental illness in humans is defined partly by subjective experience. We describe how we feel. We explain that something is wrong from the inside. Animals cannot do that. So scientists are left measuring behavior, biology, and brain chemistry. And what they find, again and again, is that the same neurological systems involved in human anxiety, depression, and compulsion exist across many animal species. The same stress hormones. The same disrupted sleep architecture. The same blunted reward responses. The machinery of suffering appears to be ancient and shared. What differs is how much of it we can see and how willing we are to look. This raises something worth sitting with. If a dog can carry trauma, if an elephant can be destabilized by loss, if a parrot can develop a compulsion it cannot break, then mental illness is not a uniquely human invention. It may be an unavoidable consequence of having a mind complex enough to be shaped by experience. The more a creature can learn, the more it can be hurt by what it learns. The more it can remember, the more it can be haunted by what it remembers. The pacing bear was not broken by illness in the way we usually mean. It was broken by confinement, by a life that had no space for what a bear's mind actually needs. And in that sense, its story is less about mental illness as a medical category and more about what happens when a complex mind is placed inside a world too small for it. We built those enclosures. We designed those environments. We created the conditions. And maybe that is the part of this conversation we are least comfortable having. Because if animals can suffer in the ways the evidence suggests, then how we treat them is not just an ethical question. It is a question about what kind of creatures we are, not with laws or philosophies. With choices. Every single day.